related to my personal focus, which is software application and product security. But the content of this talk is certainly broadly applicable to all parts of cybersecurity. So a quick introduction. That's me. I'm John Shapransky, photo from the before times. I'm a technical principal consultant at Kroll with just over 10 years of experience in security and consulting. I've been fortunate to work with public and private sector clients, from startups to Fortune 100s and across various industries and countries. And as mentioned, I'm presently focused on helping clients build application security and product security programs and capabilities. A bit of a side note, this talk is really a mix of my personal approach and experience combined with the research and experience from experts to mainly help with framing and expressing concepts that I find critical to achieving developed, implemented, and most importantly, adopted capabilities. I also believe that knowledge from outside of our domain can be applied to help us solve a problem. So a quick show of hands. Do any of these sound familiar? We bought a tool some years ago, and nobody's using it, and it's up for renewal. The audit said we have to be doing this security thing, so we bought a tool for it, and we're not seeing results. It's supposed to be self-service, but nobody's adopted it. We're supposed to do X, but we're not sure who is responsible. This is why I'm here today giving this talk. So why this talk? I like to say a problem unidentified is a problem unresolved, and I think we have a problem. Organizations heavily invest and rely on tools and technology to fill capability gaps, but fail at successful adoption. This results in spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars annually without realizing any of the expected benefits. And at the end of the day, we still have a demonstrable capability gap. And this is kind of like giving a kid a helmet to wear while they're riding the bike, but they just stick it on their handlebars and not use it. It's not very effective. Where does this problem come from? Well, the last two bullet points are adages that stand out to me that relate to this problem. When we fail to plan, we plan to fail, and hope is not a strategy. There's a little bit more. We love our frameworks and our standards that tell us what controls and capabilities we should have. Added are the regulations and standards that specific industries must comply with for a variety of reasons. And there are some contractual requirements or market drivers to also meet. And then there are some books that we might read that on this topic as well. All of this is telling us what we need to have in place and perhaps some of the why. Some of the how is available through methodologies and conceptual reference models and tools. But if these are to become capabilities and practices, how should they be implemented? How do we ensure that they are adopted and become standard business as usual? So where are we going to go from here? I'm hoping to introduce you to several concepts that I believe can help everyone have a higher likelihood of success at achieving adoption and obtaining results. My goals today are to provide a framework that gives you a way to think about how to approach developing and improving capabilities, understand adoption and how it works, understand how team structures and interactions affect adoption, understand how different service delivery models require different supporting resources, and how to approach defining and measuring success differently. Quick sip of water before we get into it. So, the first missing piece is a methodical approach to capability development. A capability is the ability or power to do something. But for us, what does this mean? It's any capability or any activity that is supported and enabled through people, process, and technology. If we look more closely at well, our domain, my domain, AppSec in this case, security, we're looking at capabilities are practices and processes that help us identify and or reduce risks to improve security. Most importantly, though, a tool is not a capability. It's only the technology piece that supports the capability. Some examples of AppSec specific capabilities. Some of these are larger, such as vulnerability management programs, you can see as a whole as being a capability, or smaller, such as static application security testing. It's a specific activity, a process. That in itself is a capability. So how can we build capabilities? Let's first consider this diagram. I mentioned before that a capability is any activity supported and enabled through people, process, and technology. That's the simplified minimum definition, but in reality, there are additional components in between that may be required. Every capability will include some or all of the components that are depicted in this diagram. And when developing a capability, you may not need everything, but at a minimum, you should ask yourself, do we need it? The need for each capability will depend on your strategy and desired outcomes for the specific capability. An example, if we have a capability that will be provided as a service, we may only need people and a policy. However, if we have a capability that is intended to be delivered through self-guided or self-service as a service delivery model, then we'll require likely a mix or some aspects of all the components we have. And although the level of maturity from capability to capability and organization to organization may vary, what's important to know is that the level of maturity that you target will affect your organization's ability to perform it consistently. So generally, a good target state for any capability is defined, and that is components of the capabilities framework are documented, socialized, shared, accessible, updated as needed to ensure that the capability continues to meet its objectives. And when developing a capability, we should have good foundations to support the capability, which means having the right people, the right governance, the right tools, and the right processes and technology integrations and automations. So you've identified the need for new capability, or perhaps the need to improve or fix an existing capability. What's next? Where should you start? What should the process look like? Here's the approach I like to use for capability development. I like to break it into 6 phases that lead us up to the point of institutionalizing and operationalizing the capability. But this means that this approach is leaving out that operational state or that maintained state. It's really about development. In the first phase, discover, this is where we want to fully understand the current state, the desired future state, that vision, the drivers and the requirements. Some of the activities would include conducting stakeholder interviews to understand where are we today, that current state, as well as the vision. Conduct user experience interviews to understand, are there any current challenges or pain points, any issues, any opportunities to make improvements and resolve before we make those changes. Review the current tool set and any associated documentation, again, going back to this current state. Any processes and procedures that may exist. Identify what our environment looks like. Identify and define our business and technical requirements. And understand our drivers and our goals and objectives, dependencies and gaps for the capability. The second phase is the planning phase. And this is where we want to define those strategies and architecture for the capability. This involves identifying and defining the definition and purpose of the capability, the scope and applicability, the goals, objectives, supporting metrics, the desired future state, those capability enablers. If we think back to a few slides, that diagram, those are capability enablers. The architecture, the processes, the procedures, how everything will work together. So specifically, think more enterprise architecture in this case. and change management plans and implementation strategy. The next is the build phase, and this is where we want to implement and execute the strategies defined in the planning phase. This is where we'll design and develop out the capability framework and the documentation, that is the policies, the procedures, the processes, any templates and guides, develop supporting resources, any training or knowledge-based material, evaluate and select tools that we may be missing, build our knowledge, in-depth knowledge of the selected tools, their features and capabilities, try to find opportunities to optimize how those tools will be used before we socialize it with others, and develop any required supporting change management communications and materials. And then afterwards, we want to pilot. And this is where we want to engage a small number of teams to test the new capability and its processes, its procedures, tools, everything, end to end. This involves identifying 5, maybe 10 teams, want to keep it somewhat small and manageable, to work with and support the pilot. Execute the processes, the procedures, everything from onboarding the teams to training the teams to supporting the execution. Letting the pilot run for a period of time to allow the stakeholder groups time to adopt and collect and form an opinion and provide feedback. And then collect the feedback so that we could adjust the capability framework as needed. Then we have an opportunity to refine, a phase of refining the capability. And this is to specifically seek feedback and adjust our processes, procedures and tools and training, and related documentation as needed before the full launch. This should entail actively seeking feedback from the pilot teams, asking what went well, what can be better, any challenges. A question that I tend to like to ask is, how can we better help you help us? Adjust the framework as needed, and think that in this case, the goal is really to improve the experience when we launch and reduce friction and increase our likelihood of adoption. And then finally, we can launch. We've built a new capability, we have a starting point, now we want to launch that and go beyond the pilot teams. This is where we want to shift from development activities into those implementation and operational, extend things beyond those pilot teams. This will typically involve performing outreach, raising awareness about the capability, onboarding and training the teams, fully supporting the implementation and integration, and following up to confirm that progress is going well and we're actively solving challenges. Okay, we've made it this far. What are some of our main takeaways? An AppSec capability is any activity or practice that helps us identify or reduce risks to improve security. A tool is not a capability. Capabilities involve, at a minimum, people, process, technology. But we should always consider whether other framework components, such as policies, standards, guides, templates, training, may be needed. And a development approach can be broken down into 6 phases to help us methodically plan, design, and implement capabilities to achieve a higher likelihood of success and adoption. The second missing piece is understanding and planning for adoption. This is not really a talk on organizational change management explicitly, so I've kept this a bit light. But I did want to briefly touch on organizational change management. You may have noticed that when talking about capability development, I mentioned change management plans. Well, why did I mention this and what was I specifically referring to? Specifically, organizational change management. AppSec requires a greater focus on people and process than on IT. We can, of course, always automate some processes, but nothing is truly completed without people. Organizational change management is not IT change management. The focus is on how changes affect people and processes, not the changes to IT. And developing capabilities requires organizational change management. So some examples of methodologies of interest, we got ProSci AdCar, Lewin's 3-stage model of change, Kotter's 8 steps for leading organizational change, McKinsey's 7S, appreciative inquiry, nudge theory. But the root of all organizational change management is ultimately to identify the changes, plan how each change will be made, and determine what is required to make each change successful. Prosai's ADKAR model ties in really nicely with thinking about adoption. ADKAR specifically stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And as we go through the next section on adoption, let's keep this in mind. So first, we need to define adoption so that we're all on the same page. Adoption is the process of starting to use a new method, system, law, etc., or the process of starting to use a new product or service. A key word in both of these definitions is use. If we're not using the capability, we have not adopted the capability. And adoption is enabled through a process of diffusion. In his book, Diffusion of Innovation by Everett Rogers, Rogers says, diffusion is the process in which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among members of a social system. Rogers' theories on the diffusion of innovation can help us improve our understanding of human behavior as it relates to adoption. They can help us understand the factors that influence the success or failure of adoption. The theories give us the principles of change management independent from any specific change management, organizational change management methodology. And I believe they can be used to help us better plan changes and improve the likelihood of success during the adoption of new capabilities. So in the definition of diffusion, Rogers mentioned that it's a process. And this process has 4 elements. The 4 elements are the innovation, communication channels, time, and a social system. The first element is the innovation. And Rogers says that an innovation is an idea, practice, or object that is perceived as new by an individual or other unit of adoption. So an example here, we can think threat modeling. If our organization has never threat modeled and no one knows what threat modeling is, even if it might be common practice in other organizations, from the perspective of our organization and the members of our organization, this is an innovation. It's new. And related to the innovation are 5 attributes that characterize how individuals perceive an innovation and directly influence the innovation's rate of adoption. The first is relative advantage, and this is whether the innovation is perceived as better than the current idea or way of doing things today. So what problem does this innovation solve? How is it better than what we do today? And what's the advantage? The second is compatibility, and this is whether the innovation is consistent with the existing values, past experiences, and needs. So is security part of our quality values? Is it a priority? Have we experienced this idea, this innovation before, and was that positive or negative? Do we have a specific need or requirement for this? So example, members of our development team may have used SAST in a previous organization, and their experience, positive or negative, will influence their decision to adopt. The third is complexity. That is the innovation difficult to understand and use? This is pretty straightforward. The higher the complexity, or perceived complexity, the harder it is to adopt. Essentially, the simpler the concepts, processes, procedures, and tools, and the better it integrates seamlessly without adding much additional complexity, the more likely it will be adopted. The fourth is trialability. Can we experiment with the innovation on a limited basis? Can we try the process in a non-intrusive, non-disruptive manner? So example here, think running a vulnerability scanner in a continuous integration pipeline, where we don't set an expectation to action the results. Although we may want the results actioned, allowing for a period of time so that the team can get used to the results and the process can enable a soft adoption and progress towards our goal and minimize resistance. And the last attribute is observability. And this is, can we see the results visible or outcomes? Can we make those outcomes visible to others? Can we see the results and the impact of adopting this innovation? Are there examples of our peers having success and a positive experience and outcome? The second element in the process of diffusion is communication channels. And according to Rogers, a communication channel is the means by which messages get from one individual to another. Information and knowledge exchange is critical to adopting new ideas. It's the communication channels that enable the exchange of information and knowledge. And examples of these communication channels are in-person discussions and meetings, email and instant message, internal newsletters or other forms of mass communication, a knowledge base, a wiki, and typically a combination of communication channels will be used to effectively raise awareness, transfer knowledge, and reinforce the message. The third element in the process of diffusion is time. And time is involved in diffusion in the innovation and decision process, the relative innovativeness of an individual or group compared to other members of the system, and an innovation's rate of adoption measured as the number of members of the system who adopt the innovation in a given time period. In the element of time, the first thing we mentioned was the innovation decision process. And this is the process individuals go through from first learning about an innovation to forming an opinion about the innovation to making a decision to adopt or reject the innovation to implementing or specifically adopting and using the innovation to confirming their decision. So the 5 steps in this innovation decision process are knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. Does this start to look a little familiar to an organizational change management methodology I said to keep in mind? Within this process, knowledge is the first step. And not everyone requires the same level of knowledge or the same type of knowledge to make a decision to adopt a new capability. In diffusion of innovation, Rogers describes 3 types of knowledge. Awareness knowledge, which stems from the information that an innovation exists. So policies, as an example, or communications that socialize the innovation or capability. How-to knowledge, which stems from the information necessary to use an innovation properly. So procedures, how-tos, instructional training, methodologies. And then we have principles knowledge, which stems from the information about the functioning principles underlying how an innovation works, such as an in-depth understanding of specific methods of vulnerability scanner uses to identify vulnerabilities and why it works. So why do we need to understand this? Well, depending on how you intend a capability to be adopted, stakeholders will need some knowledge to enable adoption. In most cases, there'll be a need to create and socialize awareness knowledge, and where action or participation is required, likely some how-to knowledge. The innovativeness of an individual or other unit of adoption compared to other members of a system. This refers to where an individual or group finds themselves on this distribution of adopter categories. If these categories look a bit familiar, it's likely you've heard of them used in the context of marketing. And the type of adopter plays a role in the rate of adoption. And it is likely that you've met and interacted with people in each. Rogers identifies 5 ideal adopter categories to classify an individual or group's innovativeness, which is the degree to which an individual or other unit of adoption is relatively earlier in adopting new ideas than other members of the system. So these are innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. Each adopter category has different needs, is motivated by different drivers, and will require different levels of effort to guide them through the innovation decision process. This figure is a general depiction of the distribution of adopters by adopter category, and Rogers describes attributes for each of these. And some of the notable attributes are, your innovators are those that are venturesome, interested in new ideas. They tolerate high risk. They understand complex technical ideas or knowledge. They can cope with a high degree of uncertainty, and they're willing to accept the occasional setback if a new idea proves unsuccessful. Then we have our early adopters, which embody success. They're the champions and the role models that are respected by their peers, and they help decrease the uncertainty about new ideas and adopting it. We have early majority. These are teams and individuals that interact frequently with their peers. They may deliberate for some time before adopting new idea, and they have a longer innovation decision process, but they are willing to adopt innovations, but just not lead. And then you have late majority. These are those that are the individuals that are skeptical, influenced to adopt innovations by external forces, such as out of necessity or peer pressure. They require that the norms favor the innovation first, and that uncertainty about a new idea is removed before they're convinced to adopt it. And then we have laggards. These can be folks that tend to be more isolated from other groups of adopters. They're the traditionalists. They're resistant to change. They rely on past experience as a reference for decision making. They're cautious and suspicious about innovations, and they have a lengthy innovation decision process and require certainty about the success of an innovation. With this general understanding of adopter categories and their attributes, we can better plan changes and support each. Additionally, we can build profiles of good individuals and teams to work with in the early stages of capability development, including the pilots and the initial launch, where it is best to find and work with the innovators and early adopters to obtain early successes. And the last bit on time is that adoption occurs over time. And it will typically follow an S-shaped curve and not be linear or immediately exponential, despite how much we may want it to be. When implementing changes that require adoption of new practices and processes, tools, there's going to be various factors that hinder or delay adoption, such as stakeholder or client availability, other business priorities, and our own team's resources and capacity to support change. And the final and fourth element in the process of diffusion is a social system. And Rogers says, a social system is defined as a set of interrelated units that are engaged in joint problem solving to accomplish a common goal. The members of units of a social system may be individuals, informal groups, organizations, and or subsystems. The sharing of ideas and knowledge occurs between individuals, and therefore in a social system. The structure of the social system can either facilitate and enable or impede diffusion. Our social systems are comprised of the organizational structure, teams, relationships, our culture, and team topologies. And these all play a role. And without this system, awareness and knowledge cannot be spread. Okay, last little bit on adoption. Outside the process of diffusion, Rogers describes 4 factors in change success and variables that influence the rate of adoption. These are things change agents, that is, all of us, should consider to create a favorable adoption environment. Success in securing adoption is positively related to the extent of change agent effort in contacting clients, Client orientation, the degree to which a diffusion program is compatible with clients' needs, and change agent empathy for clients. Change agent effort, are we socializing the ideas, raising awareness, providing training, checking in and providing support? Client orientation, there's generally a difference between being outside a group, being an outside group, such as like separate from development, such as the case typically with AppSec and security, versus being part of the development group. Compatibility with clients' needs. This goes back to that second attribute, influencing rate of adoption. Does the change align with our needs, values, and norms? And lastly, change agent empathy. Do we understand our adopters' perspective, priorities, challenges? Are we solving problems or making them worse? How we approach each of these can and will have a direct impact on successful adoption. And this was a heavy section, so here's a bit of a summary of our takeaways. We can help others help us by doing the work necessary to achieve the desired level of adoption. Using the process of diffusion, we can increase adoption success by considering the 5 attributes influencing rate of adoption and creating a favorable environment to enable adoption. A capability cannot be adopted without awareness and knowledge about the capability, which requires communication. Adoption takes time, and adopters go through an innovation decision process. Supporting this process is critical. And knowledge is a key part of this process. And different groups and adopters require different levels of knowledge. Adopter categories help explain why some easily adopt a new practice while others resist. And our pilots are best suited for those innovators and early adopters to help us with testing changes and provide early and observable results. The third missing piece is designing team structures that align with our service delivery models. The concepts and language I'll be introducing in this team topology section are derived from the book Team Topologies by Skelton and Peh. I'm only really scratching the surface on this topic in this talk, but I highly recommend anyone who's designing teams, services, and capabilities consider having a deeper look. Improving the security of software and applications requires the participation, the cooperation, and the collaboration between various teams. The way our teams work with each other and interact are influenced by how teams are structured and their topologies, that is, their purpose and their relationships with one another. And according to Skelton and Peh, team topologies clarifies team purpose and responsibilities, increasing the effectiveness of their interrelationships. This can impact how we position ourselves as components in a larger system and how we approach organizing our teams for achieving our goals and objectives. This also helps us better understand our team's priorities and focus helping better manage our cognitive load or team capacity, while also becoming more aware of the cognitive load of others. In team topologies, there's 4 fundamental team topologies that they describe. These are stream-aligned, enabling, complicated, subsystem, and platform, and each have specific characteristics. A stream-aligned team is a stream, is described as a stream is a continuous flow of work aligned to a business, domain, or organizational capability. And a stream-aligned team is a team aligned to that single valuable stream of work. So example, our AppSec team, our development team, our QA team that have that steady stream of tickets or tasks and work to complete. An enabling team is composed of specialists in a given technical or product domain, and they help bridge a capability gap. The enabling teams have the required bandwidth to research, try out options, and make informed suggestions on adequate tooling, practices, frameworks, and any component in the ecosystem. The end goal of an enabling team is to increase the autonomy of streamlined teams by growing their capabilities with a focus on their problems. And if done well, teams that are helped by an enabling team should only need them for a short period of time. And there shouldn't be a permanent dependence on the enabling team. An example could be DevOps teams that specifically build skeleton pipelines to enable development teams. Then we have complicated subsystem, which is a team responsible for building and maintaining a part of the system that depends heavily on specialist knowledge. An example, again, in this case, maybe not the best, but a DevSecOps team, which would be a group maybe within the DevOps team that is responsible for security tooling, automation, and integrations with build and deployment pipelines. And finally, we have a platform team. And the purpose of a platform team is to enable streamlined teams to deliver work with substantial autonomy. The platform team provides internal services to reduce the cognitive load that would be required from streamlined teams to deliver these underlying services. In team topologies, Skelton and Pe specifically refer to Evan Bottcher's definition of a platform to describe what it entails. And Bottcher says, a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support which are arranged in a compelling internal product. And perhaps at this point, you may start to see how presently you fit into one or more of these topologies. And logically and in practice, each team may be a composition of multiple topologies. The three interaction modes identified and described by Skelton and Pe are a bit more straightforward. There's collaboration, which is working closely together with another team, X as a service, consuming or providing something with minimal collaboration, and then facilitating, which is helping or being helped by another team to clear impediments. So why does this all matter? Well, consider this diagram that is depicting these team topologies and their common interaction modes. If our team, say AppSec, is streamlined and delivering a vulnerability management service that includes scanning, triage, prioritizing, and reporting to other teams, but we desire the capabilities, vulnerability management, vulnerability scanning, to be more self-service, we should then consider shifting some priorities or stand up a team dedicated to building the platform, thus adopting characteristics of a platform team. Otherwise, if we continue with the status quo, we cannot achieve our desired state of self-service. The fourth missing piece is understanding and planning how capabilities require services and how different service delivery models require different levels of planning, resources, and knowledge transfer. Why talk about services? As we saw in team topologies, teams often interact with each other through providing services. In AppSec, we are often providing services internally. Consider all the various styles of security assessments we do that involve specialists, that review some aspect of a system and provide findings, a report, an opinion. AppSec capabilities are often realized and delivered through services, where two parties are involved, one that is the service provider, and the other is the customer consuming the service. And by now, you may have realized I like to have definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. So here are two definitions that resonate with me for our purposes of understanding services. Adam Tacey defines a service as the application of specialized competences through deeds, processes, and performances for the benefit of another entity or the entity itself. And Christian Gronruz, a professor of service and relationship marketing, has defined a service as a service is a process consisting of a series of more or less intangible activities that normally, but not necessarily always, take place in interaction between the customer and service employee and or physical resources or goods and or systems of the service provider, which are provided as the solutions to customer problems. The parts of these definitions that stand out to me include that services are the use of knowledge and skills through processes and activities to provide a solution to one or more problems. In their paper, Innovation in Services, Galuge and Weinstein define a service by 4 characteristics. And Dr. Adam Tacey has summarized this definition in the figure displayed on screen. So let's take a quick look. Might be a little bit hard to read at the back, but on the left we have customer competences, which is what the skills and or knowledge that the customer requires. Then we have provider competences. What skills or knowledge does the provider bring? Technical characteristics, what resources or systems does the service use or depend on? And then external characteristics, which is what is the value prop or the user experience. And this method of describing services, I think, provides a great way to conceptualize what a service is. So now that we have that, a way to describe a service, stay with me a bit longer, only a bit longer. Let's look at a quick comparison between 3 types of services that I think are applicable to many of us. Self-service, which is defined by the reliance on consumer skills and their use of resources provided by a service provider. So any service where a consumer is expected to perform the activity autonomously. Then we have a typical service, which is characterized as a service that has obvious co-value generation through the integration of consumer and provider competences to realize the value proposition. So let's say a security architecture review, where the consumer is bringing their knowledge of the system and the architecture, and the security architect is providing the knowledge of how to best address threats and vulnerabilities through architecture. And lastly, we have skills-heavy service, which is a service that relies heavily on provider competences and have a negligible need for consumer competences during the active service. So let's say a penetration test, where this typically involves the consumer. There's not much competencies other than keeping the system online and being responsive, making sure that access for the testers, but ultimately the penetration testers are bringing those their knowledge and their skills to perform the service and provide results. And a key differentiator between these service types is ultimately the competences required by the consumer to obtain value from the service, which brings us here, self-guided services or self-service, which with the increasing pressure to do more with the same or fewer resources, more and more teams are looking to solve this problem by distributing the cognitive load of AppSec processes through self-service delivery models. And as we've seen up to this point, adoption requires knowledge. A platform provides the foundation to enable autonomy for other teams. And self-service requires that service beneficiaries, or consumers, have the required competences to execute the service, which means a state where the service can be performed without the provider. Which brings us here. Self-service is a target state of autonomy where consumers of a capability can perform the capability without the support of specialists. Self-service requires a platform to enable competence transfer from provider to consumer. Enabling adoption of a self-service capability requires awareness, education and training, post-training reinforcement, support and documentation, tools, automation, support services, and clear guidance and expectations. And without these, we cannot reasonably expect self-service to be a reality. And very quickly, the 5th and final missing piece, as I look at Steve to get confirmation we're good, is a different approach to measuring success when establishing new or improving capabilities that don't rely on focusing on results. I'll make this one a bit shorter. The approach we commonly see, we can label as being results-driven or outcome-driven to measuring success. And this works well for well-established capabilities and well-adopted capabilities, and usually involves simple metrics based off readily available data, such as the number of vulnerabilities identified or the number of vulnerabilities reduced in a time period. But the issue with this approach, especially for new and unadopted capabilities, is it doesn't tell the full story. And as we scale the capability and make efforts to increase adoption, there's likely going to be a negative impact on these metrics. For example, if we increase adoption of vulnerability scanning, we can reasonably expect an increase in vulnerabilities identified each time we onboard a new system and we scan it. And this negatively impacts the objectives we may have around decreasing vulnerabilities each quarter. So what should we then measure? Well, going back to Everett Rogers, factors that influence adoption and rates of success, Rogers says, change agent success in securing adoption of innovations by clients is positively related to the extent of change agent effort in contacting clients. In other words, we get out what we, change agents, put in. And we cannot expect success unless we create an environment that will enable success. Therefore, we need to measure various aspects of a capability that include implementation progress, that is, scaling and change efforts, adoption, and results. And I propose looking at it in this order: change effort, adoption, and results. And I think that might be all the time I have for today. So we'll stop there. If you have any questions, feel free to come see me. I would love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So on these words, we'll take a 10-minute break. So Stéphane Garneau will prepare himself for his presentation.